Ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin the Nobel Prize Dialogue, Tokyo 2018, entitled The Future of Food. My name is Nobuko Kashiwagi, and I will serve as your MC for today. First, as a representative of the co-organizer, Dr. Yuichiro Anzai, President of the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science, will offer his opening remarks on behalf of the organization. Dr. Anzai, please.
His Excellency Yoshimasa Hayashi, Minister of Education, Culture, Sports, Science and Technology, His Excellency Teru Fukui, Minister of State for Consumer Affairs and Food Safety, Ambassadors, Dr. Lars Hickenstein, Executive Director of the Nobel Foundation, Nobel laureates and distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am very, very pleased to welcome all of you and thank you for joining us, Nobel Prize Dialogue, Tokyo 2018. I'm really delighted that this event has brought together such a large audience of people from both Japan and other countries and regions of the world. Especially in attendance with us today are more than 100 doctoral students who have come here from countries of Asia and Africa. Thank you very much for joining us. I can see you here. This year marks the 150th anniversary year since diplomatic relations were established between Sweden and Japan. Actually, as the chairman of a promotion committee to celebrate this anniversary, I'm happy that today's dialogue will serve to strengthen yet further the bonds that tie Sweden and Japan together in scientific partnership. Nobel Prize Dialogue Tokyo is aimed at the wide body of the public. It seeks to heighten their interest in and deepen their understanding of science. The event derives its inspiration from Nobel Week Dialogue, held each year in Sweden on the day before the Nobel Prize Award ceremony. Today's dialogue here in Tokyo is co-hosted by Nobel Media, a company affiliated with the Nobel Foundation. It is a third dialogue event to be held in Japan. The topic of today's dialogue is the future of food. It asks and seeks to consider the answer to various questions from nutrition, health, or environment, or economy, culture, so many things, so many affairs, so many topics. There are many such questions that can be pursued. In today's dialogue, we'd like to explore with you the answers to some of them. As the organizer of this event, I'm eager to join you in being edified by today's Nobel laureates, hearing what they will say about issues of food and sustainability, and learning about the cutting-edge research they are advancing and its impact on our society. To help us advance today's discussion, I'm excited to say that 30 experts and authorities are on related subjects, including 5 Nobel laureates, particularly Professor Yoshinori Osumi from Japan, we are proud of him, have come here from around the world to participate in this dialogue. I must also mention that today, the 11th of March, marks the 7th anniversary of the Great East Japan earthquake, which claimed many precious lives and caused unprecedented damage, particularly to communities in northeastern Japan. Taking this occasion, I wish to convey my deepest sorrow and extend my heartfelt sympathy to the victims and all those affected by the disaster. In the afternoon, we'll have a session entitled Beyond the Disaster, It will give us an opportunity to consider global disasters in the context of today's theme of food. Lastly, I'd like to thank the Nobel Foundation, headed by Dr. Lars Heikensten and Ms. Laura Spreckman, and the Nobel Media team for the long-standing collaboration and friendship they have accorded with us at the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science, and especially for their contributions to today's highly thought-evoking event. I would also like to thank Ambassador Magnus Roback here and the Swedish Embassy staff for the strong support that they have given to us. An especially hearty word of thanks goes to our event partners and supporting organizations. Thank you very much for us. They have been a wonderful asset in helping us to hold this event. So I look forward with great anticipation to today's dialogue, bringing the scientific community ever closer to society and members of the public. Now, please enjoy Nobel Prize Dialogue, Tokyo 2018. Thank you very much again, and bon appetit.
Next, Dr. Lars Heikensten, Executive Director of the Nobel Foundation, will offer his remarks on behalf of the Foundation. Dr. Heikensten, please.
Your Excellencies, dear laureates, ladies and gentlemen, friends from all over the world, not least from Japan. Ohayo gozaimasu. Good morning. It is now the third time that I have the privilege of welcoming you all to Nobel Prize Dialogue here in Tokyo. When I did this the first time in 2015, it was also the first time that we did an event of this kind outside Sweden. Since then, we have done it in several places, but we have not been in any country as many times as here. Japan was an obvious country in which to begin for us, with your scientific traditions, your many Nobel laureates, and the great interest in the Nobel Prize in this country. Also, your country is based on values that we firmly share. Democracy, the importance of human rights, and in trying to build peace, as well as in the value of fact-based reasoning and science, all contributing to making the world a better place in which to live. We are particularly pleased to do this event again together with JSPS and Japan Society for the Promotion of Sciences. We have worked with you for many years, a good example of what is sometimes called science diplomacy. This year, when we celebrate the 150 years of diplomatic cooperation between Japan and Sweden, as mentioned by Dr. Anzai, it's interesting to note that science actually played a very important role already from the beginning. Carl Peter Thunberg, an important follower of Carl von Linné, or Linnaeus as he's usually called internationally, was working intensively here in the country already during the period when Japan was isolated, and created bonds that helped opening the doors for what has happened afterwards. Before telling you a little bit about today's program, let me remind you of the background. What is the Nobel Prize? What does it stand for? And why are we here? Alfred Nobel, the man behind the prize, he was a scientist who invented dynamite. That's what he's most known for. But he had more than 350 patents in many different fields. He was also an entrepreneur who built a worldwide corporate network. He himself was a product of the Enlightenment, with a strong belief in human power, science, in the value of knowledge. At the same time, he had broad interest in literature, philosophy, and was deeply committed to peace efforts. All these different interests reflected in the prizes that bears his name. It is in this spirit, with a strong belief that the world can become a better place if we build societies on knowledge, on humanistic values, if we invest in science, and if we do all this in the spirit of peace, of cooperation, that we award the prize that bears his name. By now, we have more than 900 Nobel laureates. As you probably know, 26 of these are Japanese, and 22 of those 26 are in the sciences. Today, the Nobel Prize has an almost unique position. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, it is the world's most prestigious prize. The Nobel Prize enjoys great trust. We believe that the long period in which it has been awarded with competence and with integrity to worthy recipients from all over the world is what has given it the position that it has. At the same time, the position that we enjoy imposes responsibility on us, especially in times like these, when science and knowledge, even pure facts, are being questioned. The climate change is one example, but a potentially fatal one. There is a great need today to stand up for the values that Alfred Nobel stood for. Of course, we shoulder our responsibility primarily by trying to continue to award the Nobel Prize in a competent way that has served the prize so much and has given it the respect it has. In recent decades, we have also increased our activities in telling about the prize and about those who have received it, their struggle, their failure, their successes. Our outreach activities are in keeping with the words in Nobel's will, when he states that the prize shall be rewarded to those who have conferred the greatest benefit to mankind. By informing and engaging people, especially the younger generation, we aim at strengthening the position of the prize and, more importantly, of its impact. In this spirit, today, we offer a broad range of activities in social media with about 4 million followers on Facebook, most of them between 18 and 25, and almost as many women as men. I certainly hope, by the way, that you are following us on Facebook. If not, you should start. We have museums in Oslo, in Stockholm. We are building a new Nobel Center in Stockholm. We have traveling exhibitions. And for the past 5-6 years, we have organized conferences of this kind, as I mentioned. Today's conference is about food. We will be dealing with the global food supply and all the challenges associated with that. The title is The Future of Food. Although poverty has decreased, hunger is far from eliminated. What will we need to do to feed 9 billion people? Well, we know we need to distribute resources between us. That, I think, is unavoidable. But is it sufficient? Will there be enough food for us if everybody had the possibility to buy it? It doesn't stop with that. Even feeding the population right now might not be sufficient. The scale of the task and the technologies required might not be compatible with other restrictions we face as humankind. We are already at the limits of what the Earth can handle in terms of climate, for example, and some say it's actually beyond those limits already. We will probably be forced to change our food habits. What that in turn will mean for us as humans, for our society, for the food we eat, how we eat it, are interesting topics. The consequences need not be negative. I should underline that. We can come out with more pleasant habits, with healthier lives. As you have understood, we have a lot to go through today. Plenty of important and interesting issues to cover. In our dialogue, we will listen to experts from all over the world and to several of our Nobel laureates. But don't forget that this is a dialogue. So speak up, don't be shy, ask your questions and participate. That is the whole idea. We strongly believe in dialogue as a method for change. Dear Nobel laureates, ladies and gentlemen, friends, I am sure we have a great day in front of us. I end, as I usually do in introductions of this kind, by noting that Alfred Nobel, if he had been alive, would have loved to be with us today. Thank you for listening, and once again, you're most welcome to Nobel Prize Dialogue in Tokyo 2018. Thank you so much. Well, you heard that I felt that I was almost at home.
Thank you very much. Next, Mr. Yoshimasa Hayashi, Minister of Education, Culture, Sports, Science and Technology of Japan, will offer his remarks. Minister Hayashi, please.
Distinguished Nobel laureates, distinguished guests, it is my utmost honor to welcome all of you here in Yokohama, Japan, to host the Nobel Prize Dialogue 2018. Today, in this landmark year celebrating the 150 years of diplomatic relations between Japan and Sweden, I am truly pleased that this Nobel Prize Dialogue is held through the joint sponsorship of JSPS here and the Nobel Foundation in Stockholm, with attendance of Nobel laureates around the world and many figures involved and interested in science. This is the third Nobel Prize Dialogue in Japan with the theme of the future of food. Today's discussion will cover the important global issues such as food, health, water, and poverty. These are the issues that the international community as a whole must tackle, and this is in line with the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, adopted at the United Nations in 2015. The SDGs are gathering growing interest nationally as well as internationally as the common goals, or common language that connects various stakeholders across sectors. It is believed that science, technology, and innovation will play major roles in achieving the SDGs. This dialogue will provide great opportunities for us to meet together to discuss these important issues among prominent scientists and experts, including Nobel laureates. Today, our Professor Yoshinori Osumi, the 2016 Nobel laureate in physiology or medicine, will give us a lecture on food and the role of autophagy for overcoming hunger. To start with, including so many other Nobel laureates and distinguished scientists. This is a great opportunity to discuss the future of food from various perspectives. And not only as a Minister of Education, as a former Minister of Agriculture, I'm deeply concerned about these issues personally too. So I hope that today's dialogue will be very fruitful for all of us, including inside and outside the science. And In regard our relations with Sweden, marked the 150th anniversary, as I told, I visited Lund in Sweden in January this year to see Europe's most advanced research facilities there, and had a good time to exchange views and opinions with leading figures, including State Secretary to the Minister for Higher Education and Research and the President of Lund University. Japan and Sweden share many things as the developed countries facing similar challenges. Academic exchanges are increasing, tackling with these challenges. Taking this wonderful opportunity of the 150th year, I hope that Japan and Sweden cooperation will further go forward. Finally, I would again like to express my gratitude to GSPs and to the Nobel Foundation for providing this tremendous opportunity for us all. And please enjoy Japanese cuisine, which received 2013 Intangible World Heritage by UNESCO. Sushi, tempura, sake, you can choose it. Thank you very much.
Minister Hayashi, thank you very much. From here, I would like to pass on to Dr. Adam Smith, Chief Scientific Officer of the Nobel Media AP, who will give you an overview of today's program. Dr. Smith, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Nabucco. Thank you. So, good morning. So, as Nabucco says, I'm Adam Smith, and it's my great pleasure to be your guide to today's Nobel Prize Dialogue. As you'll have seen, and as Lars mentioned, we have a very full program to get through. So my role is actually twofold. I have to be your guide, and I also have to try to be your timekeeper. I think the second job is going to be harder than the first. Our program is divided into 3 parts. For the morning, we'll all be here in plenary session, listening to a series of lectures, panel discussions, and conversations, broadly about the science and culture of food. Then after lunch, the meeting splits into 3 parallel streams, giving us the chance to discuss what the issues that are raised this morning in more detail, and also giving you the chance to comment and question. And then after the coffee break, we all come back together again to this room for the closing, future-focused plenary discussions. So, without further ado, let's get started. I'm very pleased to say that for our opening lecture, we have Professor Yoshinori Osumi, 2016 Nobel Laureate in Physiology or Medicine, to give us a short lecture on the connection between food and the system he discovered, autophagy. Professor Osumi, please.
Good morning, everybody. I'm the basic cell biologist, so I would like to discuss about food from the biological point of view, and I will briefly introduce what is autophagy. Okay, as you know, life is maintained by continuous nutrient supply from environment. And we take these nutrient and energy conversion and metabolism, we grow and develop various kind of biological activity. Among of those molecules, protein is the most important macromolecule for life. And those proteins are made by 20 kinds of amino acids. And we know the protein is so important because all of the genetic information written in DNA is transformed to protein that function for biological activity, almost all biological activity. This diagram simply shows the protein dynamics in our body. We are taking 70 to 80 grams of protein every day from food. but we are continuously synthesizing protein 200 to 300 grams per day. Just these two figures tells us the difference of 70 to 20 grams of protein, say that all of the protein in our body is degraded, and that makes amino acid pool, and that be utilized to next round of protein synthesis. And so life is just an equilibrium state between the synthesis and degradation proteins. It is surprising that almost all our body protein are replaced every 3 months without any apparent change in appearance of our face or body. So that is a very big difference between the organism and the man-made machine. So life in nature, nutrient starvation is most serious threat in nature. We have deaths of hunger on the earth, and you see in the TV screen wild animals such as polar bear, lion, cannot get enough food so easily. And also you see in the newspaper, sometimes in newspapers, accident in the sea or mountain, people can survive for a week without any food, just on water. So it is very important to know the survival mechanism against starvation. That is a very important selective pressure in evolution. So degradation of their protein is very important feature of their life. So almost 30 years ago, I started work on the yeast vacuole. That might be there in a homologous organelle lysosome, lytic compartment in mammals. This thin section is a yeast cell. You can see just this big organelle, that's a vacuole. You can't see anything inside. And the problem I had is if this is a lytic compartment degrading protein, and what and how and when these cytosolic materials get into the vacuole to be degraded. The idea I had is that if I block the protein degradation with the vacuole, we might see some structure delivered in the vacuole just under microscope. This slide showed that just I found in 30 years ago. This is a yeast vacuole, and the 3 hours starvation, we could see this kind of a spherical structure in the vacuole, just moving around in the vacuole. So this is a time course. After 30 minutes, this kind of structure appeared, and after 3 hours, vacuole was almost filled with these structures. We started the electron microscopic analysis. The structure inside the vacuole is a single membrane bound structure. Inside is just a portion of the cytoplasm. So, and we found just a membrane sac next to the vacuole and a portion of cytosol. And this double membrane structure appeared, so-called autophagosome. And autophagosome fused with the vacuole membrane here, and in the membrane structure get into the vacuole here. You see these structures, we name it autophagic bodies, are just, I showed their structure moving around in the vacuole that contains the cytoplasm. And you see here, autophagosome. The structure inside the vacuole contains many ribosomes, a very big structure, and also this kind of mitochondria. The big organelle is degraded via autophagy. So almost 30 years ago, we drew this kind of scheme for autophagy in yeast. When yeast cell face nutrient starvation, suddenly this kind of membrane phenomena appear and end up apportioned site so target to the vacuole. And this structure in the wild type cell, this structure immediately disrupted, and the inside constituent degrade and to amino acid and reutilized to the next to the starvation condition. We started the genetic analysis, and we got first autophagy defective mutant. Those mutants cannot stay long starvation. After 2 days, these cells start to die. And I thought this loss of viability and starvation might be due to the loss of autophagic activity. Using that phenotype, we found 18 ATG genes are required for autophagy in yeast. Those ATG genes, I do not go further. ATG genes are divided into these 6 functional groups. And we found also these ATG genes are well conserved from yeast to mammals and plants. Once ATG genes are found, autophagy research changed a lot, and if we could see autophagic process in yeast without electron microscopy, this slide shows the GFP ATG8, LC3, that's the ATG8 yeast homolog, and that introduced to the mouse, we can see how much autophagy occurred in various tissues, muscle, heart cell, liver cell, and also in a fertilized egg. And also, we can manipulate the ATG genes, and we know now autophagy function various kind of physiological event, not only starvation, they degrade intercellular floating aggregate and even invasive bacteria. And also, autophagy is very important for tumor growth, so it's very important to tumor suppression, and they are related to antigen presentation and also longevity. So we know now that there are 2 major functions of autophagy. One is, as I said, the nutrient recycling. That's very important for survival under starvation. And also, autophagy is important for elimination of excessive or harmful material from the in the cytoplasm. So that's very important for life. And we also showed that autophagy is induced by zinc. It's a quite important nutrient, and zinc starvation induces autophagy, and autophagy is essential for several ion homeostasis. And also we showed there lots of RNA. Nucleic acid is also degraded in the via autophagy. So degradation process, I want to say degradation process is equally important as synthesis. So recycling of our cellular constituent is very crucial for life, and to elucidate the mechanism of the recycling is very important to be uncovered. And also, probably fasting may help to enhance their autophagy activity and quality of life. So this meeting, I want to discuss about their food as a social viewpoint. I want to show just one figure. This is the lifespan of the male in Okinawa Prefecture in Japan. As you see, these two, about 30 years, Okinawa Prefecture was the first ranking in the male lifespan, but so quickly changed. Now it's almost the bottom of the lifespan in the Japan prefecture. So eating is not, we cannot live alone, so eating is a quite social event. And also, I want to discuss about the cultural viewpoint, viewed as from the cultural viewpoint. Food is one of the culture, and each nation or ethnic group has own traditional food. It is very important to know what is food stuff and how they way of cooking. And also brewing sake is a sake or liquor. It's a very traditional way in every country. So we eat to live, not live to eat, but also eating food is joy for our life. And food is very important factor for quality of life. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. Is it true that you brew your own sake?
What? Sorry.
Is it true that you brew your own sake, Professor?
Yes.
You do?
Sake is a very complicated process to make, so it's the most sophisticated process. It's very difficult to make own sake. Yeah.
Well, I wish we could try the sophisticated sake now. Anyway, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So we're now moving to the first of our panel discussions, and the stage is going to be reset. I think we need some chairs on stage, please. We're going to consider the question of whether we can feed the 10 billion people who are expected to inhabit the Earth by around 2050. And for that panel, I'm very pleased to welcome 4 people. Please, can I have on stage Finn Shidland, who is the 2004 laureate in economic sciences, Akinwumi Adesina, who is the president of the African Development Bank, Marion Guiou, who is president of the board of directors of Agrinium, the French Institute of Agriculture, Veterinary Science and Forestry, and Masa Iwanaga, who is president of GIRCAS. Please, can I have the panelists for our panel? Hello? That didn't work. I'll go and drag them out. Hi. Thank you. Finn? Yes. I can. Marion at the end.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I'll sit here, and then I'm afraid you don't have a seat because you're going to give a talk. So
Okay, great.
please sit down. So, before the panel discussion, Masa is going to give us a short introduction to the topic of can we feed the 10 billion? The stage is yours, please.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Smith. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to give a brief introduction about this session's theme. Can we feed 10 billion people, your plate and our planet? World population has reached just past 7.5 billion and projected to reach 10 billion by around 2050. In our daily life, we enjoy having delicious meals with our families and friends. But sometimes we forget or we take the food we eat as granted, and we are not concerned about what it takes to produce them, where those foods are coming from. Now, with the population increase, question is how we're going to nourish people in the future. But first, we need to take a look at the current situation. Global number of hungry people has gradually decreased. But sadly, we still have more than 800 million people who are not getting enough food or go to bed hungry. Moreover, about 2 billion people are suffering from what we call hidden hunger, which is due to poor intake of micronutrients such as vitamins and minerals. Moreover, there is a surge in the number of people who are overweight or suffering from obesity. Sad to say, we have to recognize that we really have serious problems in our food production and health even now. With projected population increase and change of diet with more animal-based product will require at least 70% more crop production. Can we produce that much to meet ever-increasing food demand? How healthy is our planet now? Agriculture is a leading cause of environmental degradation. Agriculture is the largest user of limited resources, such as fresh water and land surface. Agriculture, especially animal production, emits large quantities of greenhouse gases, which account for about 25% of total global emission. It is also a major cause of environmental degradation. It is a major cause also soil erosion, biodiversity loss, and deforestation. It seems that we are eating at the expense of a sustainable future. Climate change is a number one risk for agriculture. Various extreme weather events, such as a drought, heat wave, and floods, are the primary ways by which we feel climate change. They are causing already a detrimental impact not only agriculture, but also on our daily lives. So with all these impediments to agriculture, what and how well we will be eating in the future? The answer is it depends. It depends on whether we, the world community, can collectively achieve the following: no further expansion of croplands, increasing productivity by 70%, improving input use efficiency, and most importantly, making a lifestyle and societal changes. And finally, adapting technological innovations. In conclusion, there is a lot of work to do together. Are we willing to take up the huge challenge we are facing now? The challenge is to achieve healthy diet and sustainable food production without harming the environment and within the limit of Earth's boundary. The answer is upon us, and the time is now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So Masa Iwanaga will have the chance to moderate one of the afternoon panels, which will be a longer discussion of this same topic with these panelists and one more. And now we just have the chance to touch briefly on some of the issues that have been raised. So let me start by referring back to his penultimate slide, where he gave potential answers to the question of whether we can feed 10 billion people, and ask whether you agree with that slide. Akin, let me start with you, please.
Well, first and foremost, I want to say that when I listen to Professor Oshumi about we live, we don't live to eat, but we eat to live. So it's clear that if we don't produce enough food, we're not going to be alive. And so when you take a look at how to feed 10 billion people in the world, it's critical to figure out where the land is to be able to do that. When you take a look at Africa, the kind of thing you always think about is Africa doesn't have enough food and things like that. However, 65% of all the arable land left in the world to feed that 10 billion people is actually not in Asia, it's not in Latin America, it's not in Europe, it's actually in Africa. If you take a look, for example, at the savannas of Africa, it's roughly about 600 million hectares. But 400 million hectares of it is actually arable, of which we only cultivate 10%, which is 40 million hectares. So the key is, I agree with Masa on one point. We've got to raise the productivity of those savannas. We've got to make sure that we learn from some of the experiences like in Brazil, where the cerrados of our highly acidic soils became today the source of the export of Brazil. We have to do a lot more on zero tillage systems that make it more climate resilient agriculture. And at the same time, we've got to make sure that we have infrastructure, because if you're going to feed a lot of people, it's not just about raising food production. You've got to be able to process it, you've got to be able to store it, you've got to be able to move it to the markets. So all I'm trying to say is that the future of food is really going to depend on what we do with agriculture in Africa.
It's a very arresting thought, because there's so often the mantra that there should be no expansion of croplands. But you say Africa is the one place that they should be expanded, most definitely. Very interesting. Thank you. Marianne, please.
Yes, I do agree broadly with the conclusions of Dr. Masa Iwanaga, of course. But I think I would add that agriculture has a big role to play in mitigation to climate change and adaptation to climate change. And maybe we could talk then about the role of the soil, for instance. And what I would add on the items he has mentioned as what we have to do all together. Of course, I won't forget culture, listening to Professor Oshumi, but I would add access to food, because he did not mention that at the moment we have enough food for all the people on the planet, on average. But of course, it means nothing, as he showed. That is to say, 800 people with not enough food, a lot of deficiencies because we lack diversity of food, and at the same time, overnutrition. So the problem there is not quantity, is first access to food, physical access for the 800 people that lack food, physical access because of conflicts or, of real disturbance problems, and economical access, of course, people that cannot afford to buy the food they need. So maybe I would add that immediately the first problem would be access and inequalities. But then, if you look at the global picture, we have another element that was missing. It's about health and antibiotic resistance. That is a growing problem and linked to animal breeding and how much antibiotic you use for animal breeding. So I would add those two items to his list of what we should collectively do at world level. And then I would like to reformulate, because he said no more crop use. I would say we have to optimize land use, urbanization. You know, how can we, well, control urbanization, expansion areas? How can we keep the forestry as much as possible? So it would be, for me, a question about how we use the land we have.
Thank you very much indeed. And again, this is the perfect use of this session to raise these topics which can be discussed throughout the day, some of them now. But Finn.
I'm not, I've never done any research on food per se, but what I've learned a lot from is being a member of Björn Lomborg's panel for the Copenhagen Consensus Center to rank solutions to world problems. A main input is the benefit-cost ratios. Where do you get the most bang for the buck? And one thing that caught me, and he commissions research papers in 10 different areas, maybe 40 or 50 pages backing up these solutions. One thing that caught my attention in a paper by Susan Horton and John Hodinock was they claim the world is already producing enough food to feed 9 to 11 billion people. The problem is how to get the food to those who need it and those who demand it. The issue of infrastructure was mentioned, extremely important. One thing I would like to add is, so when we evaluated solutions to the area of hunger and malnutrition, I should say, by the way, that typically out of the top 10 out of 60 or 70 solutions to world problems, typically out of the top 10, 5 of them were in the area of hunger and malnutrition. So it just shows how important they are. And an interesting thing is that often these interact with education. So with lack of nutrition, cognitive ability is hurt, education suffers. There's a famous study in Guatemala where the study 35 years ago was, so how much effect does adding micronutrients like vitamin A and zinc and microfortification like iron and salt iodine, how much of a positive effect do they have? And they're incredibly effective in terms of their benefit-cost ratios. There was a follow-up study of the people who had been part of this program to see how well they did 35 years later. And it turned out those who were part of that program, they earned on the average of 66% more than those who were not part of the program. So this just shows that it's not only important for the nation's education attainment, but also how well the economies in general will develop.
Akin, you might want to pick up on that point.
Yeah, I want to agree with Fred on this issue, because it's not just producing more food. It's really making sure we have enough nutritious food. And I agree also with Marianne in terms of access to that nutritious food. But on the issue of, one issue that concerns me globally is the rising level of stunting that we have. We have about 155 or 156 million kids under the age of 5 that are stunted. And from Africa, where I come from, roughly about 58 million kids that are stunted. Now, where that is linked to education that he was mentioning, Finn, is the fact that if you look at neurons in your brains and you look at learning, cognitive ability and all of that, that the kids that are actually not well fed lose out in terms of learning and future earning potential. So when we look at malnutrition, however, we tend to look at it as something for a social sector development activity. But I don't believe it is. I actually think it's an infrastructure, in what I call gray matter infrastructure. Because I can repair a bridge or rail or port, but we can't fix a brain cell when it is gone. So we've got to really prioritize that and make sure that if you have stunted kids today, you're going to have stunted economies tomorrow. And so we've got to really invest right in that. So I want to really endorse what the Copenhagen panel said that Finn mentioned, the need to have biofortification. We have a lot of genetic gains that we've done in that particular area. When we look at subsidies that are provided for staples, we've got to make sure that a lot of most of those subsidies now are given for more nutritious food. But the first 1,000 days is critical for a child. And access to micronutrients, as Finn mentioned, it's so crucial. But finally, I want to say that we also must be very concerned, and I think Masa is right, about the increasing issue of obesity, because our lifestyles have to change. What we eat has to change. And also the nexus between urbanization, the kind of food supply systems that we have, and we eat a lot of food that is rich in calories, but very deficient in vitamins, iron, and zinc that he mentioned. So we must have urban policies that give us healthy lifestyles, in our urban areas. It's not just food, but we need healthy lifestyle.
And the evolution of diets is another thing we need to talk about. Exactly. Marianne, please.
Yes, I agree entirely with you. And the fact is that the evolution is exactly the contrary. That is to say, at the moment, there is a simplification in the crops, so a decrease in the micronutrients, that people have around them. And so we have to build a new diversification of the crops. I mean, we have to diversify. We have to use ecological function of, water cycle, big cycles, carbon cycle, and things like that. And so it's amazing because we have all the techniques to do that. So the problem is how we manage to rethink with the farmers, because they will be the actors. How do we rethink the systems? And it will be on a local basis, because there is no one solution for all. So we have to tailor the solutions to the local conditions and to the people. So that will be, for me, one of the big evolutions that will come in the 10 or in the coming years. And the other evolution I would like to stress, because usually people don't know about it, is the soil function. Usually we look at the soil as a support, but it's not a support. It is a living place. 1 billion living organisms in a gram of soil. Did you know that? So it means that the soil needs to be lively so that it works. It works to produce food, or it works for plants. And so first, the soil is a living matter. Then the soil has the capacity to absorb carbon, and to be a good soil, we need organic matter in the soil, and carbon organic matter. And did you know that in the soil globally, you have twice more carbon storage than in the atmosphere? And at the moment, the soil carbon concentration decreases because of the practices, the urbanization, the fact that we use tillage and things like that, that we send back some carbon in the atmosphere. And so I think one of the functions of agriculture in the coming years will be to rebuild and to replenish the carbon sink in the soil of different zones in the world. So we are very unequal because it depends on the kind of soil, temperature, humidity and things like that. But agricultural practices, we know about that, have a big role on soil retention, on carbon retention in the soil and carbon role in the soil. And so we know that manure, we know that mulching, we know that coexistence between livestock and crops, we know that many practices will improve the ability of the soil to stock carbon. So maybe that's one of the items for the future, that is to say agriculture for climate change mitigation.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to say, you mentioned farmers, and we shouldn't forget farmers. It's a very important point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of farmers that we cannot feed 10 billion people in the world if we don't have farmers. And the point is that I think the greatest threat we have to feeding those 10 billion people is what I call the NFL. You would think the NFL is a national football league in the United States, but actually NFL is no farmers left. Because there's a rapidly aging population that we have. Folks aren't going into agriculture. The average age is very high in most places. The young people don't find it as very cool or sexy area they want to be. And I think it is, because I come from an agriculture background. But I think the key really for us is, how do we change the labor composition of the agricultural sector so that we have younger, more dynamic farmers, younger farmers that can use automation, that can use artificial intelligence, that can use in robotics and all the drones and things like that we need for modern agriculture. I think we've got to make agriculture very cool for young people, and get a lot of more younger people into agriculture. I'm equally concerned about the declining enrollments in agricultural sciences quite generally. All across the world, you find that as the need to feed the world is rising, the enrollment in agricultural sciences is actually going down. No more than 3-5% in Africa is in agricultural sciences. And so the key is we need a lot more programs to get younger people into agriculture. At the African Development Bank, we've got a program that we're spending about roughly $1.5 billion a year, and we'll do that every year for the next 10 years to change the labor composition of the agriculture sector and get younger, more dynamic entrepreneurial people into agriculture that will feed the world in the years to come.
Thank you. Marion nodding and shaking her head. So is the situation slightly different in France? Or?
Well, there is a recent evolution on what I saw in Europe, because when you talk about agricultural science now, you talk about ecology, you talk about systems approach, you talk about very modern sciences. And so we have seen an increase in the number of students applying our sector. So maybe, because we link with all, important questions, and young people want to be in important topics. Now we draw more and more people.
Yeah, well, I think the key is to look at agriculture, not just, you're right, from the primary production side, but to look at the whole agricultural value chain. You see a lot more opportunities for young people if they were in storage, in processing, in logistics, and in marketing, and things like that. But I think we have to make the whole agriculture profession much more dynamic and exciting for young people.
Would you agree, Finn?
Absolutely. One thing I would like to mention is, in that area, the resistance to GMOs in many parts of the world. I've talked a lot to Sir Richard Roberts, and Nobel laureates like Roger Kornberg would back this up, that the resistance to GMOs by Greenpeace and other organizations is what should I say, very unfortunate. Sir Richard would go so far as to say that preventing the use of GMOs is a crime to humanity. So that's one area in which one can clearly do a lot. Crops that are more resistant to factors that will tend to destroy them otherwise. And of course, they're quite efficient in many parts of the world.
I think that's a very good topic for our last 2 minutes. Marion?
Yes, it's a very hot topic. So, in fact, I think we should know about GM. We should learn about GM and do research about it. But what can we say to a society that says that the GMs that have been put on the market, that is to say herbicides resistance, well, they don't care about it. They don't see the utility for them. they look at what the advantage it brings. It brings that to the farmer, but to the consumer, they don't see the advantage. So my point of view is that, of course, a GM that would talk directly to the people, that would have, let's say, a public good aim, would have been far easier to explain to the people.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, I think that we cannot, it's not politics that feeds people, it's science. And we've got to really get on the fact that a lot of GM technologies are actually quite good. If you look at, you know, insect resistance, if you look at resistance in times of drought, and also, you know, flood tolerance and things like that. But we also talked about the need to have nutrient-dense crops and stuff like that. So it's very, very important. The issue is to give consumers the choice to have good safety and risk management issues. I think those are the things we have to do. When people talk about GM, you know, maize, you know, folks come to United Nations every year, you know, summit from all over the world. What do we think they eat there? They eat GM food. They eat, you know, soya that is GM soya in the United States. And so far, I haven't seen anybody walking around with horns or anything like that. So I think we've got to balance it. That we need science, we need technology, but at the same time, there must be ethical issues. We've got to make sure that the issue of environment and biodiversity and consumer preferences are well handled. But we shouldn't run away from science.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Okay, well, as timekeeper, I at least have to stay to time, I'm afraid. So, 20 minutes we've used. It's been an absolutely fascinating discussion. And just to close, can you say in like 2 words whether you are hopeful that we can feed 10 billion?
I am hopeful, and I think we don't have to feed. We have to nourish in a sustainable way. It's more than feed.
Absolutely. During the Malthusian era, people thought it couldn't be done because they didn't plan for science. I think science, technology, innovation will make sure that we're able to do that.
I think I started off with the answer. We're already producing enough, and
Good.
It's a question of getting it to the right place.
Splendid. Thank you all 3 very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So, if I can ask my panelists to leave this way.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful. Thank you. And then, now we're changing tack a little, moving into another discussion, this time on the subject of the microbiome. So I think we lose 1 chair and gain 2 new panelists. May I invite Tim Hunt, who is 2001 Nobel laureate in physiology or medicine, and Suzanne Devkota from Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles to join me on stage, please. Tim and Suzanne, please. Thank you. Suzanne at the end. Tim in the middle.
Okay. Wow. And we get a lot of water.
Yeah. That should keep us hydrated for a long time.
Yes, to keep the microbes well
Yes,
hydrated.
So, in this rapid-fire morning where we change from subject to subject, oh, that's fine.
That's all right. If we're going to use them, the top has to come off.
Thank you. Yes, quite so. We're switching topic to the microbiome. And Suzanne is a specialist in microbiome research. So let me start by asking you, please, to tell us what the microbiome is, for those who don't know.
Sure. The microbiome is all of the bacteria, fungi, eukaryotic viruses, phage, protozoa that live in and on our bodies. It's different than infectious diseases. These are microorganisms that have evolved with us since the beginning of time. I think we can look at our mitochondria as a good example of that. But these organisms are involved in our normal day-to-day functioning. They're native microbes, and it's a new and emerging field.
And why does it matter?
Does it matter? Does it actually matter?
Yes.
We have a skeptic.
It absolutely does matter. The microbes confer about 20% of our daily caloric energy intake. So in the absence of microbes, it dramatically affects how we process the foods that we eat. And the microbes are, we just heard there's about 1 billion microbes, and I think in a gram of soil. Our intestines have 100 trillion microbes in them. And these microbes are vital to how we digest foods because they have enzymes that we don't have for food digestion. So they're absolutely critical, I think, for proper processing of foods and maximizing the amount of nutrition we get from our foods.
But can I ask, how well do we understand what they do for us?
Well, as I mentioned, it's a emerging field. It's about, I would say, in its current form, about a decade old. So we're really just scratching the surface of the true potential of the microbiome. We know a lot more about the bacterial component of the microbiome because they make up the largest proportion of all of those organisms that I mentioned. And we know a lot more about what they are doing, and we're starting to learn that they're involved in amino acid production. They're definitely involved in fiber digestion and fiber breakdown. They're involved in how fatty acids get to certain parts of the body, and so definitely at a macronutrient and a micronutrient level, there's a huge potential. And I think on the heels of the last conversation, I think this is a really appropriate topic because if we're talking about nutrition and nutritious foods, which I completely agree is the direction we should be going, if we're thinking about how foods just nourish our bodies, I think we're missing a huge potential. I think we actually need to think about how foods nourish the bacteria in our intestines because then we can really maximize the true abilities of all these nutritious foods that we might be creating.
Okay, and just one last thing from me, and then I think I'm going to let Tim go. So to speak. Do we understand at all how we might manipulate their ability to do this job for us yet?
We are beginning to, yes. So I can make a bold statement, but I think it's widely accepted in the field now that food is the primary driver of our bacterial composition in our intestines, at least. And I think that, therefore, food is probably our biggest opportunity to manipulate the types of bacteria that we have in our gut. So we know a lot more about certain species that are more sensitive to certain macronutrients, and certain fats can drive the expansion of certain bacteria, while others can actually suppress certain organisms. So the holy grail is, can we selectively manipulate certain microbes, almost in a pharmacologic way, but through food, to maximize their potential. And that's really the direction the field is trying to go, is selective ablation or expansion of microbes. And we do feel that there might be certain foods that have the potential to do that.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Tim.
Yeah, no, so it was a real revelation to me. I heard a wonderful man. I mean, we have to be careful about the language we use, but basically this was a talk in a school about shit. And the problem is that if you try and grow these bugs, most of them don't grow because we don't actually know what they eat or what they, So it came as an amazing revelation when people started sequencing DNA in what we call defecation events.
Yes, right.
And it was amazing to discover what a huge variety of creatures there were, most of which had never been seen before.
Yes.
And then people started wondering, well, what do they do? Well, of course, what they do is they can also make you very ill. We've probably all had eaten something that disagreed with us and get terrible diarrhea, and then the whole lot presumably is swept away. Right. And then they sort of, come back. It's very interesting. And what do we know about where they come from?
So, great question. If you think about birth, right, the dogma has been that we're sterile at birth. In utero, we're sterile. That dogma is slightly changing. There might actually be microbes.
I bet there are, actually.
Yeah, but it's a simplified microbiota. And so you're born with a very simplified microbiota, maybe 5 organisms, whereas as an adult we have about 1,000 different species. So where do those bugs come from? Well, it's primarily from our mothers and from our food. Those are the primary ways.
What we eat.
What we eat.
It's actually in the food.
Food is
yeah.
actually carried on.
And you notice actually when you go to a new country, I mean, you know, something changes inside you,
Yes.
right? I mean, there's no question about that.
Yes, we actually are doing quite a few studies following people as they travel throughout the year, and it shifts. But the remarkable thing is when they come back home, for the most part, it shifts back.
Back, yeah.
Yes.
And apparently, I read somewhere there's a gradient. I mean, from the south
Yes.
to the north, the different kinds of bacteria predominate. I don't remember what they
Yes.
are, but
Yeah.
So does that make a difference to people's nutrition then?
But it probably does. We need more population-based studies, taking large populations from different parts of the world. And the nice thing is, as you mentioned, all of this is done through analysis of fecal matter. So it's really non-invasive. It's just an issue of how comfortable people are giving us their samples. But through fecal matter, we can learn so much about the microorganisms in a population scale. And we need more of those studies to really
I
understand.
guess your specialty is especially in disease, right? I
Yes.
mean, you know, there are some people who have terrible, you know, they don't eat bread or because they're allergic to
Yes.
things. I mean,
Yes.
you know, and how much of that is changes in the microbiome? I mean,
Yeah, there's, so I live in California, so we have a lot of interesting beliefs about food and people who like to go to extremes of trying different diets because they believe that they have an intestinal problem, whether it's gluten sensitivity or something like that. Some of these, so celiac is a genetic issue, and we know that that's been shown, but a lot of people believe that they have other food sensitivities that are a gradient from that, and that might be microbial in nature. We don't fully know, though. A lot of it is belief, and some of it, some of it is actually, you know, manifested as intestinal changes. But there's some interesting work being done on the interaction between our native microbiota and acquired, you know, eukaryotic viruses, and an individual's composition of their microbiome may actually confer how sick they get when infected by, you know, a salmonella, or you go on a cruise and you get your norovirus. So there's some fascinating work on the interaction between acquired infectious diseases and how your own microbiome can either defend or make you more susceptible to those.
I don't want to stop you because I'm enjoying this, but but in these extreme cases where people have sort of mono diets, I don't know, somebody who eats Soylent only.
Right, yeah, we've done a study on that.
Okay, fine. Does it radically change the microbiome, or once you're an adult, is it kind of set and doesn't matter really what you're going to do?
Right. Well, one of the fascinating things is on a food basis, one of the biggest things that manipulate the microbiome is actually presence or absence. So starvation versus, you know, nutrient replete. So if you are eating these intermittent fasting diets, which are very popular right now, the 5-2 diet, where you drop down to 500 calories one day, then eat normally, then 500, and you go back and forth, your microbiome will shift dramatically through just depriving it of food, of whatever it is that your diet happens to be. And then we've also similarly tried to compare a Soylent-type diet where it's calorically at maintenance, but it's all liquid, and the microbes actually don't change that much. So one of the primary ways you can dramatically shift the microbes is through simply removing food. And so there's a lot of research into malnutrition in parts of the world and how the absence of microbes and the suppression of certain microorganisms are actually contributing to, you know, villus atrophy and so on in the gut, and is helping inform how nutrient reintroduction in these populations is thought about.
So there's a famous DNA scientist called George Church. I don't know if
yes.
you've come
I know
across him.
George.
So I knew his research supervisor when I guess he was a graduate student, and George was very rational about this thing, and so he used to make himself a sort of human L broth, you know, which is what bacteria like to live on. So he just sort of looked up what all the things you needed and then set it with agar and just made a week's supply of this stuff and ate it. Now, I don't know what happened to him, but I mean, is it possible that one could live on a sort of liquid diet which just had all the nutrients we need? And And if so, what then happens to our gut bacteria?
Well, in theory, I suppose that you could. I think I'm not trying to advertise soiling, but that was the idea behind.
That's an extreme solution. I mean, it would
yeah.
be horrible, I'm sure.
No, it's horrible.
Boring
but you could. I mean, I suppose in theory you could figure out every nutrient the body needs to survive and create that in a liquid form and consume it.
I mean, we can do that for cells, after all. They grow
sure.
perfectly well in culture,
yes.
so why not a whole human?
Absolutely, and you could, and your microbes would adapt in some form or another. The key really is what fiber choices you're choosing, because you definitely need fiber. But if you're including your what we call prebiotics in your liquid broth, in theory, your microbes could be happy. Yeah.
I want to come back to this idea of how important it is, because we're in a stage now of research where the microbiome is being more and more involved in more things. There's a great deal of work now connecting the microbiome to neurological function. I mean, how much do we...
How solid is the evidence?
How solid?
Is it really true that these bugs are good for us? I mean, if we don't have them...
Yes.
I once was on a course of antibiotics,
yes.
and presumably that just, was a big, very serious course.
Right.
Now, am I going to suffer for that week of bug-freeness?
Well, that's such a loaded question. So remember, antibiotics are only getting rid of the bacteria, so you still have all your fungi and viruses and everything are still existing in there. So that you can have expansions of fungi, which is sometimes a bit of collateral damage to antibiotics.
Oh,
some of these fungi you don't exactly want
about the fungi.
overgrown.
Yeah.
Most people forget about the fungi. But we have germ-free models. We have germ-free mice.
Yeah, germ-free mice, for example. Yeah, and they're perfectly well,
They're
apparently.
perfect. They actually they breed happily, and they're quite fine. But then you look at a cow, for example, and a cow would die without their microbes.
Yes. Well, I discovered that cockroaches would die without the microbiome.
Yes.
Termites, likewise. There's not much nitrogen in wood, and termites eat wood, so they have all these very exotic creatures which actually fix atmospheric nitrogen for them.
Yeah, termites.
And we don't go that far, I think.
We don't. They have some amazing microbes that we actually don't have. But cockroaches is an interesting story, because there's been studies where cockroaches have been placed on pure lard, like Crisco, and pure sugar. And they found that the microbiome does not change at all, depending on what food, which shows that cockroaches will outlive all of us, I think.
They're very robust organisms.
Yes.
But I mean, of course, on one level, our really important microbiome is the mitochondria, which we all contain, which were sometime in the dim and distant past we acquired.
Right.
And the cockroaches are kind of like that. I mean, they actually they live in a particular specialized cell type in their liver, if I remember right, and they're very important to them,
Yes.
They're so important that they won't let them go.
Right.
Although how they get them in the first place is apparently very interesting and not clearly understood.
I'm not a cockroach biologist.
No,
but,
me either.
but there's so many questions you can ask about the microbes and their role in human health, certainly, and that's where most of the research is focused. But in agriculture and in cattle and livestock, it's a major question. And in terms of population growth combined with climate change, and you have less available space to grow things, we have to become more resourceful. And our microbes actually have the potential to be one of those ways that we can become more resourceful, because they can actually harvest energy and make foods more nutritious by taking carbon from foods and other aspects of food and then converting them to something we can use.
So in your view, the microbiome will be something that we manipulate to our advantage in the future?
I think we have to. We absolutely have to in the current climate that we're in. We have to. Yes.
And also, I suppose that it also slightly changes our view of what we are thinking. I mean, what to be human is...
We're more of an ecosystem.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
More of a mess, anyway.
Right.
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, we have as many microbial cells in our body as we do human cells.
Although they're very, very small.
They're very small, yes, absolutely.
I recently found somebody sent me a paper, and there's been some revision of this. But it's still, we have about... So a 70-kilogram standard man, apparently it's slightly different for women, so I use the word man advisedly, has about 200 grams of microbes.
Yeah,
in
I've heard
them.
numbers as much as a kilo.
Yeah, I think that's an overestimate according to this
microbes.
this rather careful
Yeah.
study. But I mean, you know, we can't really weigh them.
No,
it's hard.
it is quite difficult. And with each defecation event, that number
Of
changes.
course it changes, but by a factor of how much, I wonder? A factor of 2 or something? I mean, not an order of magnitude.
Yeah, it probably is not measurable in a meaningful way. But the original estimates used to be we're outnumbered 10 to 1. Now it's more 1 to 1.
Yeah.
But still,
we also
that's
have a lot on our hands and our skin and our hair and everywhere,
yes,
right?
we have. The main niches are skin, oral, nasal, urogenital tract, and GI tract.
Yeah.
Of course, bacteria will migrate to parts of the body where they don't belong, and that causes problems for us. But those are the main niches, and there's people studying each of those niches and how they affect, dermatological diseases
Exactly.
and preterm birth, for example, and of course, inflammatory bowel diseases and cancer. So it's really in the neurological diseases, one of the most provocative, I think, area of study. And that's purely not microbes translocating to the brain, but microbial byproducts coming into our systemic circulation and passing through the blood-brain barrier.
I guess one potential consequence of this is that it's going to be a wonderful marketing opportunity for food companies who are going to be able to say,
it's already been.
without really understanding what's going on, they're going to be able to say, this is going to be good for your microbiome. At least
it exists
we have
already.
to be very careful about the language, right?
Yeah, well, some people are more careful than others, but it's definitely the food companies are very interested in this, and many of them are actually very thoughtful in the way they're approaching it. We all know about our yogurts and our probiotics in that regard.
Yogurt is fine stuff, right?
Yogurt
is full of bacteria, which are perfectly harmless to most people at any rate.
They are. The big question is what you eat actually getting where it needs to go, and in the reality is probably encapsulated forms are more effective than yogurt. But if you're eating yogurt every day, some of that is going to get to your intestines, and I would continue doing it if that's part of your diet. Yeah.
Okay, well, just to finish off, this is a future-focused meeting. When do you think we're going to reach a point when people are going to be able to boast about their microbiome? I mean, now people can say my BMI is this, or when are we going to say, well, my microbiome is bigger than yours, or whatever? I don't know.
Well, amongst my colleagues, we already do that, but because we often are our own guinea pigs, in full disclosure. But I think it actually will be sooner than you think, because there's DNA tests, saliva tests that you can send off, and you can boast about your genes. There are kits like that now for microbiome sequencing, and you can send it off.
Really?
Yeah,
How
for
much does it cost?
$100, you send off a very simple test, and it'll give you a profile of what you have, and it'll sort of give you a sense of good versus bad, and then you can boast today, I guess.
Okay. We'll get you one, Tim.
All right. It's a deal.
It's a deal. Okay, that's been absolutely splendid. Thank you both very much for a very stimulating conversation. Thank you.
Good. And now we lurk in the background, yes?
Well, we lurk. Yes, you lurk.
We lurk.
Okay, thank you very much, Suzanne. Thank you. Right, moving on. We've been talking about food thus far. We haven't seen any food, but now we move to a session where we're actually, at least on stage, going to get to taste a bit, which is going to be tantalizing for you because you're not going to taste anything at the moment. So I apologize. But in this session, we are going to have the chance to taste cultivated bluefin tuna. And I have three people joining me, so we need one more chair. There's a bit of stage management to get done here. Back onto stage is going to come Tim Hunt again. I'm also going to welcome Professor Kato from Kindai University, who is the person who's been culturing bluefin tuna, and also Yuko Harayama from the Council of Science and Technology is going to join us on stage for the tasting as well. So if you'd welcome them all on stage, please now. Hi. Welcome. Thank you very much indeed. Nice for you to be here. Please. So, I think you sit here. Tim here, Professor Kato.
Oishi, ne?
Now, don't touch yet.
No. Wait. Where are the chopsticks?
I think there might be in
Oh,
these
they're
little
in here.
baskets. Yes.
Okay. Oh, good.
Okay. If we could just roll the video, please. Very brief video. So that's just a very brief.
That was it?
Just a taste. That was it. That was it. That's just
Was
to
those your fish?
exactly introducing you to Professor Kato's fish. So these are the bluefin tuna that you cultivate. And just before we taste it, can you tell us first of all why it's important to cultivate bluefin tuna?
The recent years, the wild stock biomass of Pacific bluefin tuna is 10% of that in 1960s. And unfortunately, this species is endangered species and was in red list as vulnerable species in 2004. So for the sustainable supply, we have to conduct aquaculture industry of this species without using wild stock. So we successfully produced this fish by operating full cycle culture of this species.
Thank you. Now, bluefin tuna are very big, right?
Yes.
So how do you culture them?
Yeah, how do you get the eggs and sperm out of a bluefin tuna fish?
Actually, the size of eggs is only 1 millimeter in diameter. Okay. So the hatching lab is about 3 millimeters in total length. So
but presumably a female tuna has millions of eggs.
Yes, you're right, yes.
Yes. So how do you get her to shed the eggs?
We reared brood fish, brood stock of tuna in sea cages. The size of cages is 40 meter in diameter and 20 meter depth.
Big swimming
and they are spawning naturally in cages and collect the eggs and reared on land-based facilities.
Okay, and how about sperm?
Just after spawning, the male fish chase female and naturally.
So you put a male together with a female, and then you get lots of fertilized eggs.
But why has it been so difficult to make it work in the past?
Because this fish is very, very nervous, and survival rate in the first 1 month is about 3%, only 3%.
Wow.
Yeah. And
these are the little ones?
Yes, because they even in larval period, they start to eat fish. So the cannibalism occurred in
they eat each other
in the tank.
Yeah.
And the survival is
and what do you feed them on when they're very small? First
food is zooplankton, and then change to the
Where do you get them
of
from?
Another fish species.
Where does the zooplankton come from?
We can culture the plankton, yes.
In the lab. Yeah.
And then we use pellet for feeding.
Trout food.
So what is the percentage by the time you go from egg to grown fish?
Yeah.
What percentage have you left?
Less than 1%.
But 1% of several million is still a lot of fish.
Yes.
Okay. So, you've been very patient. Thank you. Please, would you tell us what we're tasting? Can you tell?
This fish is from Amami Oshima Island, and this fish was born in 10 July 2013. This is 4 years old fish, and body weight is 99.4 kilograms, and 1.7 meter in total length.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
We usually sip the tuna. It's about 50 kilograms. This fish is bigger than the normal sipping size. The taste of tuna is better in a larger size.
Oh, really?
So maybe I think this one is better than our normal production.
And how does a 99 kilogram fish compare with the wild fish? Is that the same? Is that the
Same? Yeah, of
same
course,
size?
yeah.
Now, has this been frozen?
No.
No, this is absolutely fresh.
Yeah, we took up this fish on
How old?
7 March.
7th of
and
March.
Aged,
and it's now
aged 4
so
days.
it's 4 days.
Yes.
Is it better after 4 days
Yes,
aging?
yes.
At what temperature? We need to know these.
Nearly zero.
Nearly, very close to zero.
Yeah.
So in your fridge.
Yeah.
So yes, okay.
In very cold water.
I mean, I'm very impressed. I do the shopping at home in Okinawa, and
we should mention that Tim, despite his accent, lives in Okinawa.
yes, and actually, I had a great pleasure the other day because we went. My wife had to fill in her tax return, so we went to the local tax office, and next to the local tax office is a local fish market. And by 10 o'clock. The fish auction had been concluded, and this enormous Spanish mackerel came into the fishmonger's shop, and the man just whoosh, and then his wife cut it into beautiful little sashimi pieces. It was absolutely delicious, and you know the thing was dripping from the sea when we bought it. Fantastic. But the real point is that actually, I'm sure it's the same as here, in the Okinawan supermarkets, the standard of sashimi in the just the ordinary supermarket, humble supermarket, is superb. I mean, it's just unbelievably good by my standards, and it's thanks to people like you and the people at Skiji. It's wonderful. I can only say thank you.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
I had a chance to go to the restaurant held by Kinki University in Tokyo. It's fabulous. Many tuna, good one. And also you receive the certificate of graduation of each tuna.
Oh, really?
It's fantastic. Please try to go there next time you'll be in Tokyo.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Goodness. So did our fish have a name?
Yeah.
Did our fish have a name? Okay.
And what's the difference
we have
between
two
the two
types here. Tell us
kinds?
the two types. Tell us about the two types of fish.
Yeah, the left one is akami, red meat, and the right one is maybe chutoro,
belly,
containing high contents of lipid. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Now, how do we do this without eating noises down our microphones?
Well,
that's the question.
You just have to chew silently.
Sorry, everybody. I do apologise for this.
This is really torture for you.
Isn't it awful? Who thought of this? This is terrible. Excuse
Which
me.
should you have first, the lighter or the darker?
Uh-oh.
Oh, try akami, red ones first.
First, red meat first. Yeah. Okay. I'm trembling with excitement.
I'm going to say it's very good, but I'm the novice here.
Well,
now that you're a resident, you're an expert.
Delicious.
Thank you.
Quite lovely.
What a treat.
Yuko, what do you say?
As usual, it's fabulous because, we talk about the cultural aspect of foods. And this is one of the most cultural. I feel at home when I eat tuna. But given the scarcity of natural resources, I'm conscious about not to eat so much. But today, it's offering a chance to keep this cultural aspect to my generation, to my daughter's generation, and so on.
Yes.
So keeping this aspect is very critical, and it's so good.
And do you let the little hatchlings, at some stage out into the ocean as well, or do you keep them all in your
Keep
tanks?
them all.
Keep them all.
Okay. Experimentally, we release fish.
It would be interesting to know whether you could actually help to repopulate the oceans.
But there is difficult problem to maintain genetic variation of wild stock. So if we
well, you
use
just have to catch
wild
more
stock,
female and male.
yeah.
It can be done. It could be done.
Yeah,
in
I think
principle.
so. But carefully monitoring the genetic variation. But
I mean, I'm wondering how much is known about the habits of wild tuna, in fact. This is not easily studied.
I'm not so familiar in the field.
Yeah, okay.
But I think they eat more compared with the cultured fish to keep their body. And they
probably
must,
expend more energy swimming.
Swim to catch diet.
Yeah.
So they use more energy compared with the cultured fish.
And so it's early days, but how much is the supply of wild bluefin tuna being supplanted now by your cultivated bluefin tuna? Have you already had an effect on the use of wild?
For the aquaculture industry or the...
No, so from your cultivated program, you're already supplying local restaurants and suppliers?
We start tuna aquaculture project in 1970, and at the time we fish the wild young fish and put into cages and feed them to grow up at edible size. And that time, the natural biomass of Pacific bluefin tuna is not so decreased. So we can catch enough amount of young fish.
And so looking to the future, when do you think that you can make a change in the biomass of Pacific bluefin tuna? When do you think that things will begin to get better?
From 2 years ago, the Japanese government start restriction of fishing. So, and in the case of Atlantic Ocean, they already start the fishing restriction, and already the resource is increasing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So I expect the increase of wild biomass of Pacific bluefin tuna, and I think the important point is optimum level of catch and the optimum level of aquaculture industry. Yeah.
And how about other kinds of fish? I mean, there are...
Now, government try to increase the number of fish species for the restriction of fishing.
Yeah. But is tuna the most profitable, actually? Or would there be other things that you could grow and make a lot of money? Well, I mean, it's not only tuna, right? Sure.
So, government try to tight restriction for this for bluefin tuna.
So, please.
In your lab, you are exploring other kind of species besides tuna, and I think it's really growing parts.
I mean, I imagine if they can do tuna, they could do anything, basically. I mean, this
other
is very
fishes.
It's very impressive. I mean, it's this is real high-tech, sort of high-tech, low-tech stuff, right? I mean, it's interesting.
Agriculture is really primary sector, and combining the high-tech, and then we are so happy and really serving everyday life.
Okay, so this was a tasting session, so I cannot comment, but Yuko and Tim, would you say this was as good as wild bluefin tuna?
Well,
that, I suppose, is the essential question.
Well, I wouldn't know. We haven't actually. You may notice we haven't actually done the experiment.
No, there was no comparative
there was
tasting.
No comparison. So, which is regrettable, I think. I don't think Mr. Nobel would have approved of this experiment.
No control. Yuko?
It's delicious. I mean, what can I say?
It's delicious, of course, and it's more delicious than traditional way because we are accompanied by the older audience.
Exactly.
And I hope you are sharing my tasting without your real tuna. Sorry for that, but I'm enjoying with all.
Precisely, and this is what food is all about: sitting, having
Good
a meal
company,
together.
good meal.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you all very much for bearing with us while we had our enjoyable meal. Thank you, Professor Kato, for us. And thank you to our fish.
And thank you to the fish, yes, the poor fish.
Great,
Really
okay.
Great.
So?
I'm going to have the last piece. Get that. Lunch is very hungry.
Can I help you? No. So while Tim finishes off, we are going to move into, in a way, the natural thing to talk about now, which is the culture of food and what we eat and why we eat it. A perfect continuation, if you like. Now, for this panel, I need to look at my sheet to check who's coming. So, yes. So, our moderator for this is Mariko Hasegawa, who is the president of the Graduate University of Advanced Studies. We also have Hans Diesenhofer, who is 1988 Nobel laureate in chemistry, Claude Fischler from the CNRS, Stanley Ulijasek from the University of Oxford, and that's it. Those three panelists, and Mariko Hasegawa as the moderator. And if the stage is set, let me invite them on stage, please. Mariko, so nice to see you.
Nice
Thank you.
To see you again.
Okay.
Okay. So
Thank you.
where to sit? I don't know. Whatever you like. Okay, great. So the next session is about what we eat and why, the anthropological and historical and cultural reasons for that. And so I think that this is really a big theme. And I think that we can talk about food as material, material for the nutrition, energy, and taste. And there is another aspect of eating the food, that this is acquisition of food materials and the cooking and eating. These are the social behavior, the activities we do. And so the Professor Diesenhofer, he's a 1988 Nobel laureate in chemistry, and he has been doing research on determining the determination of the three-dimensional structure of protein, especially related to the photosynthesis. And so the photosynthesis means that plant, and we are eating plants. So that to start with, I think that I'd like Professor Diesenhofer to tell us something about our relationship between photosynthesis plant and humans from a larger ecological view. Yes, please.
Okay, that has been my interest for quite a long time now. And if you look at the biosphere as a process, a chemical process, then it is all driven by light energy from the sun. And this light energy is caught and used by organisms that can do photosynthesis. These are plants, but also bacteria. And this has been going on for quite a long time, like 2.3 billion years or so at least. And what happens fundamentally is that the light energy is used by the photosynthetic organisms to, on the one hand, split water into oxygen and hydrogen. On the other hand, capture carbon dioxide and add it to and form it into substances like sugar that can be used for energy storage. And over time, two things happened. First, the oxygen was enriched in the atmosphere, starting from practically nothing to now about 20%. And the plants produced an enormous excess of things that could be used by parasitic organisms to maintain their life. So from the photosynthetic world, there comes the sugar and the oxygen, and now we have a whole world of organisms that make use of these and essentially live on the sort of the surplus that's produced by photosynthetic organisms. And we are part of this parasitic world. And so we should very, very well take care of the environment in a way that enables the continuation of photosynthetic organisms. Otherwise, we will be lost.
Yes, so we have evolved on the earth, the plants first, and then the predators or the herbivores or frugivorous animals like us, and so that we have to be very careful about the ecological balance over the relationship related to our food. Yeah, and I myself, originally from biological anthropology, and I did my PhD on behavior and ecology of wild chimpanzees. I stayed nearly 3 years in Tanzania, living with the wild chimpanzees and observed what they eat and how they eat. And so I have quite a lot of knowledge about what chimpanzees eat. And while I was there, I tried to bite on almost all of the chimpanzee food, and it was not a good idea, and most of them are really disagreeable, and including ants. So the Professor Stanley Uliashik from Oxford University, he's a biosocial anthropologist, yeah, and interested in the evolutionary basis for and cultural variation in nutrition, human nutrition. So probably you have something to talk about the evolutionary change through time and what humans eat and why.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I can link both of your comments. Well, first of all, humans are indeed parasitic upon the world. We can eat almost anything. That's not to say we should eat everything. That's one of the problems, and we'll come on to that. And the second is that understanding what chimpanzees eat actually helps us understand what humans should eat. That in fact humans diverged, the human evolutionary line diverged from chimpanzees maybe about 6 or 7 million years ago. And with that came a lot of changes. One, we stand on 2 legs, we have big brains, and there's been a systematic increase in energy capture to the point where we can capture our energies from so many different sources. And originally, we are fundamentally plant eaters, very fundamentally plant eaters. We can get that knowledge from understanding chimpanzee diet, on the one hand. And then at one stage in human evolution, there was a big change which resulted in increased meat eating, maybe about less than 2 million years ago with the hominin species Homo erectus. This was the big game changer for human evolution. With that came increased brain size, the natural selection for smartness, that most of us seek intelligent solutions for the problems that we have in life. And actually, this has had an evolutionary basis from about 2 million years ago. So we added on top of our plant eating, meat eating. Then human populations started to expand out of Africa. With expanding out of Africa came, first of all, the possibility of fish eating, moving across coastlines, and also moving to colder environments, to different environments, to seasonal environments, whereas not just the tropical seasonality of rainfall difference, but also the winter-summer seasonality, and learning how to consume different foods in different ways in different places. And this set, I think, the baseline for the kind of diversity of diets that we see in the present day, and the reason, and an evolutionary reason why we seek dietary diversity to the present day. And, I think we can think about how we consume foods from an evolutionary perspective. The desire for sweet foods. We all have a seeking of palatable foods. We have a taste for sweetness. We also have a taste for bitterness, which is something that is originally, from an evolutionary perspective, meant to prevent us from consuming toxic foods, like the chimpanzee food you ate might well have been bitter and found it very unpalatable. You have a higher sensitivity to bitterness than a chimpanzee, for example. So we've evolved this so we can seek dietary flexibility and want to try novel foods, but we have ways of avoiding toxic foods by having 25 different receptors for bitterness and only one receptor for sweetness, for example. So this is a highly evolved set of things. Now, of course, we know we can learn to enjoy bitter foods in relation to sweet foods. We know in Italy, for example, people enjoy this more than perhaps most other places in the world. And so then we start to add on the cultural factors that help us enjoy foods. And this is part of our encephalization, a large neocortex that allows us to enjoy food in an associative way. It's not just food. The enjoyment comes from engaging our neocortex in thinking about food in very associative ways and pleasurable ways.
Oh, yes. And food, food is a food. Eating is a pleasure, and food should be tasty, and this is really a collective, cooperative activities in humans, I think. And so that Professor Claude Fischer from CNRS, he's also a social anthropologist and comparative social science perspectives on nutrition with an emphasis on social function of eating behavior. So that, please, to say something about the collective activity.
Well, there's really a couple of points I wanted to make. One of them is, first one is, we all agree that nutrition is the primary biological function. You need to survive before you can reproduce. And usually my colleagues in the social sciences take this very humble stance that they begin by reminding this, and then they say, but it's not just that. There's also the social dimension, there's the symbols, the imaginary dimension, there's all. But I would make a much bolder statement. I would say that nutrition is the primary biological function, but it's also the primary social function. And the reason I think you can say that is when you think of human evolution and the role, for instance, cooperation has played with the advent of hunting. And when you cooperate to obtain meat from game, after that, obviously, there's the issue of how the meat is shared and distributed. And we get from the anthropological record the information that in hunting-gathering groups, and we were hunter-gatherers for most of our evolution, in hunting-gathering groups, there are some very strict, elaborate, sophisticated rules that guarantee that some of the hunted meat will be distributed to everybody in the group. And it's not just the good hunter that it eats meat. So the social dimension of food is, as it were, very basic, and you could make the point that humans obviously are social by nature, so that the usual distinction, binary opposition that anthropologists take for granted or attribute to the Western mind between nature and culture is really irrelevant in this respect. And the consequence, of course, is that a lot of of our relationship with food is actually based or associated with our relationship to other people. And the sharing of food is probably the primary dimension of any human social group. That's through the socialization of children, for instance, at the table or around food, are taught implicitly, often, but explicitly also, some very basic ethical rules and values like sharing, respecting hierarchy, age, that sort of thing. So it is the primary social function. And then the other thing I would like to say is that we take it for granted nowadays that we have preferences and aversions on an individual basis. But come to think of it, at some point there must have occurred something like the invention of choice. Because in most traditional societies that ethnographers have been studying and are studying, some of them are still there quite often, there is no dimension of acceptable choice. That is, taking part in the meal is a collective thing by definition, and there's no way individuals can really escape it. It's really stigmatized. Eating alone in a number of cultures, if not all traditional cultures, is actually stigmatized. It simply isn't done. It doesn't occur to people. And if it does, then there's very heavy suspicion against whoever does that.
Right, but I think that technology's development is really changing that kind of situation nowadays. And starting from the invention of a microwave oven and the very sophisticated ultra-processed food, the people are more and more eating alone. The opportunity, the chance to eat alone is increasing, and especially for the children, the mothers working, the father working as well. And when the small children came back to the home, they have to eat alone, but they can do that because of the microwave oven and the processed food. And so the technology is really changing the concept of a family ties through the sharing the food and things. What do you think?
I think this is another step along the way of outsourcing food processing. So if we think from an evolutionary perspective, our teeth are the first instrument that we have for processing food. So we use our teeth to grind up food and consume it. The second is the blade or the knife, which processes food, cuts it up and makes it more digestible. Then we have cooking, and now we have microwave ovens. And possibly something more in the future.
That's right.
Well, it's the distribution of the division of labor. I mean, if you want to eat chicken in the family and you have to catch the chicken, then kill the chicken, then feather the chicken, then empty the chicken, then cut it up and cook it up. You don't want people to come one after the other to eat. You have to call everybody at the same time. Now, of course, with the processing of food, it's very easy to obtain any food, at least in an urban setting, at any time, without much effort. And that is true not only for the wealthier part. There are some cultures, particularly, say, in North America, for instance, where food is so easy to procure and so cheap that it actually becomes trivialized, and people don't pay any attention to it. And you might make the point that some of the chronic non-communicable diseases are associated with this sort of trivialization of foods that, of course, as usual, include a lot of fat, a lot of sweet, and a lot of whatever you're not supposed to eat in excess.
Yeah. So that those current development in the civilization, technological civilization, more and more make us to separate it from the whole idea of a whole ecosystem. And so now all those food production and industry production, I think that the idea of us in a part of a whole ecosystem is really fading or the becoming weaker and weaker. What do you think?
Well, I mean, the idea may be fading, but the fact is still quite alive. We are part of the ecosystem. Unless we learn to do photosynthesis on our own, in a way. And I think there are steps towards that where we can sort of circumvent the natural process. And then I don't know whether I should wish that this should happen. Probably, I hope not in my lifetime, because I like the traditional way of eating, and especially here in Japan.
Oh, thank you very much. Oh, so we are running out of time, and so we can't draw a particular conclusion type of things from this discussion. But I hope that the audience can pick up some of the food of thought for their own thinking about what we eat and why. And it looks like that we missed the feast on the bluefin tuna, and just talk about food and why, and then we have to finish this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sorry. Yes, now we've set a new precedent. We have to feed our panelists. That's a different thing. I'm sorry. Thank you very much indeed. So, talking of eating alone, now we're going to move to somewhere where I suspect people do eat alone quite a lot, which is space. And in fact, we have some space food here. And over lunchtime, this rice and bean mixture that's destined for space is going to be served along with lunch in little spoons. So I think you'll get to try some space food, some of you, when you go up and find your lunches. So for the next conversation, we're very pleased to welcome Chiaki Mukai, who is now Vice President of Tokyo University of Science, but was Japan's first female astronaut, in conversation with Yuichiro Anzai, who of course is president of JSPS. So if I can welcome the two of them on stage, and they have a full meal in front of them. So things are really getting good here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, Dr. Mukai, or Chiaki, is the first Japanese female astronaut. I'm very happy here with her. And Japanese food here. これお赤飯だ。
And this is rice with the red bean.
Red beans and curry ですね、これ。これは
Yeah, this is a curry.
Curry です。それから、
Yeah.
and
There's a
サバの味噌煮と。
Yeah, there's a mackerel with miso
Oh, it's all right.
flavor.
Yeah. May I?
Yeah, please. Actually, I have
Chewing
also
gum.
some food, but
Chewing
this is
gum
a sample which I cannot
you
eat,
cannot.
but you can eat.
Okay. Sorry about that.
But anyhow, thank you very much for having me. And how does it taste like? It's good?
Very good.
Very good.
Really, I'm honest. サバの味噌煮 wonderful, excellent.
Yeah, it's the savannah misoni
本
is canned like this. So if you just take a look at this slide, now we have 31 Japanese food, the space food has already developed.
当にあ
But this does not necessarily mean that we always eat this Japanese food on board,
on board.
which
Really?
means
Yeah.
we usually eat routine food, which is developed by U.S. Operation system and also the Russian operation system,
Okay.
mainly.
Yeah.
And then this Japanese food is the one that when the international crew members have a flight, we can introduce this their own country's food to introduce their culture into space. So this is a bonus food.
Ah.
So it's a very, very small amount of special other food on the crew, but they can introduce this Japanese food on board the International Space Station, the rest of the crew. The most important part is by eating this home country's food, it makes the astronauts' the psychology very well. Because sometimes you miss the food, like a miso soup or that kind. That's how we introduce this one.
My eyes still go to here. The ordinary food. Dr. Mukharchek said, this is my first time to eat space food, but I really would like to know more about what astronauts are eating in space or in spacecraft.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah, actually, as I mentioned, we have 31 Japanese food, and it looks so good. And then even, like, for example, the Dr. Anzai is eating like this, because Japanese food is very beautiful. So it also gives a very good presentation by seeing it. But when we eat it, this is a way. In space.
No.
That's beautiful food. It's inside of the package. So the taste, like the same, like for example, the mackerel miso taste. But as a matter of fact, it's in the aluminum package or plastic package, etc. Because the food needs to sustain, last more than 1.5 years.
I see.
So. And also, this is a way that we eat curry. So rather than using salsa, we have to eat it from the package. So the taste is same, but the presentation is different, makes a little bit different, I guess, in space. And then, think about the current situation. Our astronaut Yui is eating soup and noodle. And even the soup and noodle, we can bring it in space. But we need some special way to bring it because the noodle is just the mass. It does not separate from each other. And also the soup needs to have some high viscosity so that the fluid won't spread out. And even the fresh fruits, we can eat. So quite a lot of the food, the same kind of food that we eat on the Earth can be introduced into space. That's the current situation. So it is very good.
You were selected as a crew of a space mission, and I remember 1994 and 1998. What were you eating around that time or before that? What were astronauts eating? In what ways? How were they?
Yeah, because my flight time was back in 1990s, so the food system has very well established. But if we think about the history of the space food, because originally it started like this. This is the image that many of you may have, like a toothpaste type aluminum tube food. And this is a mercury. And then I can just introduce the progress of the space food in terms of the different project.
Yeah, that's my image for the present. Present astronauts are eating like that. That's my image.
Yeah, of course, the way to package the food is almost the same way, but this time the Mercury, the duration of the flight was very short, so that they even didn't need food. But they started the test of the food, how to chew it, how to swallow it, or taste it same, that kind. And then they followed by the next project, that is Gemini. And interestingly enough, the hydration is introduced. So that if you just take a look at the picture, now we use a syringe to introduce water into dried food so that the hydration can be done in space. And then going to Apollo, now the food becomes more and more developed so that this time we can also, they could use spoon, the utensils to eat. Not the hashi yet, chopstick yet.
No.
Not the chopsticks yet, because chopsticks is so sophisticated, need to wait the time to come. So the Skylab, now the fridge, the freezer, refrigerator, and heater, and even the heated table introduced. So the utensils and the heated table, and they put some food like we do.
Real technology.
In one meal. And then here, this is the time that you questioned to me, like a space shuttle time, which I flew 2 times in the space shuttle. And then the space shuttle time, I think everything is very well developed, but it's not only the developed space, the specially developed space food, but also we introduced the off-the-shelf food in this, into the space food. Like if you just take a look at it, you can recognize mayonnaise and candy and snack and cookie. Those are the ones that we eat on the ground. They just put it in the different package in a way that it does last longer, then bring it into space. So quite a lot of off-the-shelf food were introduced. Now back into the current situation, International Space Station. And my time, I was at only 2 weeks on the 10 days flight. It's very short. So it is very difficult to have meal together. But in the International Space Station, it's a one-shift operation. Everybody have the same time to eat so that they can get together, exchange idea, and also exchange culture, and introduce their homemade food into space. That's the current situation.
Yeah, that is another aspect of food. People get together and communicate each other on a table while eating. You are doing that in our International Space Station.
Yeah, but unfortunately, my time was not the International Space Station, the shuttle time, and especially I was a science type astronaut, so we needed to utilize the space laboratory, 24 hours operation, so the 2-shift operations, so the blue team and the red team, so the time we can get together was the other shift's breakfast time and my shift's dinner time. So during the 2 weeks mission, we had a wonderful time, maybe once or 2 times to get together to eat the breakfast and the dinner together as a meal party. But now, International Space Station is kind of utilizing the eating time as some kind of meeting time to exchange idea.
Yeah, now we understood that the advancement of science and technology will have gone along with the advancement of the space food for astronauts in space. But I understand also that that kind of social aspect and also or space food can be applied to, for instance, or nursing care, care food, or for emergency or disaster, that kind of things. But at the same time, that space food or eating the space gives some influence to human health. So many things are related to, particularly for the future of space food, I think. How about?
So thank you. I believe space will be a very good test bed for anything related to food, especially human spaceflight is involved. Because currently we are using the low Earth orbit, which is currently the International Space Station is orbiting. But we are heading to Moon and Mars. Oh, and by the way, talking about the International Space Station, we just talked about the preference viewpoint, which we just introduced the food as a culture, introducing culture or the food that you want to eat in space or food you miss in space, like a miso soup or that kind for Japanese people. But it's the preference approach. But not only the preference to choose the food approach, but also we have to think about the requirement, nutritional requirement. The same as like even some people don't like spinach. Your mom says, eat spinach for your health. The same, the doctors or nurses says, oh, no, Chiaki, you have to eat spinach more, or that kind. So the requirement is very specifically set for the International Space Station. But this kind of requirement is the one that for future, when we develop food, it's very important. So talking about the future, now we are going to International Space Station, to Moon and Mars. And then the environment is the one, it gives us a harsh condition so that we have to prepare from not to become diseases. So, and also the food production is one of the issues. So the current situation is only bringing food like this, like a camp food, pre-fixed or pre-prepared food, so that it's like camping food on the International Space Station. But when we going to Moon or Mars, not only bringing the food from Earth, we also have to produce, harvest, and cultivate the food. So this is one of the example. It's a test for how we can cultivate the fresh vegetables like lettuce in space.
Yeah, we'll stay in space for a couple of months or more years, and we need that kind of things.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Moon takes only 3 days to go, so that if you need something, oh, I forgot to bring this water, or I need miso soup to bring from Earth, you can do it. But if we heading to Mars, one way takes 8 months, and then the round trips almost currently close to 3 years.
3 years.
So if you just count the amount of the food, it is a tremendous amount of the food. So it says we have to think about how we can efficiently eat, not to lose bone and muscle, protect our body from the radiation or that kind, and also product food.
Chiaki is also a medical doctor. Yes, I see.
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, the medical doctor part may be fast, so I can just, by the way, this is the way that the space food is used for emergency survival food supply. Because it requires long-lasting preparation as well as the packaging. So it also helps the people who need emergency food. And also talking about the medical issue, this is a little bit busy slide, but when you go to space, you lose bone, calcium, maybe 10 times more, even the young male astronaut compared to the 10 times more the lost in calcium compared to the osteoporose women. You lose 2 times more muscle compared to the bedridden patient. So we really need to enhance some nutrition in a food. So the functional food is maybe not the very good translation, but the food which specializes some function to enhance the nutrition is required for future development, like calcium enriched food, or maybe for the radiation, we need some antioxidant and also probiotics and prebiotics for immune system is very important. So this is the way that we actually develop some food.
I see.
And the way to cooking is also now being developed. Like so far, just hydration or heating, that's the way that astronauts, cosmonauts eat. But maybe on moon, we have to develop some space kitchen.
Oh, yes.
So that the cooking in kitchen will be also introduced. Maybe 3D printer can be used for developing pizza or that kind.
Yes. Well, I had pizza on the moon. Yes. Thank you. Our time is coming, but at least I learned 3 things. One is that it's really the target of science, space food, and science and technology, and for the future. I learned that it takes 3 years to go and come back from to Mars and from Mars, and that's one thing. And second thing is that our space food is related to many things, like or emergency or disaster and nursing care and everything like you said right now. Third thing is this. Delicious.
So thank you
Great.
very much.
Yeah.
That is the technology that Japan has.
Thank you very much
thank you very
again
much.
for joining us. And
Thank you.
you.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you. JAXA and the collaborating company will serve some limited number of space food on the 3rd floor for general audience, I heard. And also JAXA show this kind of space food at the booth. Thank you very much again. Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So, as President Anzai mentioned, in the audience today we have, I think, 110 students who have come from 21 countries and regions to attend the HOPE meeting, and I just thought we ought to say hello to the HOPE students. So, hello, HOPE students. There they are. Welcome. Right, one more discussion before lunch. This one is focused on, quite appropriately, traditional Japanese food. And for this one, I'd like to welcome Yoshiki Tsuji to the stage. He is the chairman and head of the board of directors of the Tsuji Culinary Institute in Osaka. Hello.
Thanks.
Please.
Back there? Yes, great, thanks.
Thank you.
We have 5 minutes.
I know, but we're going to bend the rules for you.
Thank you.
Actually, I'm a bit disappointed because you're from the Tsuji Culinary Institute, or rather, you run the Tsuji Culinary Institute, and I rather hoped, based on the idea that food is being served, that we might be having some gastronomy now. But it's
I'd rather have tuna as well than talking about Japanese culture.
So, could we start? Could you tell me what traditional Japanese food is, please?
You want me to talk about 1,000 years of history in 5 minutes?
You can have 6.
Okay, well. It's hard to do so, but I'll try as packed as I can. I think I can come up with 3 key terms, maybe, to describe what Japanese food is. First of all, it's geography. Secondly, the influence. And thirdly, innovations. And I mean by geography that constitutes what Japan is. Influences mainly from Asia and Europe, interestingly enough. And thirdly, innovations, thereby creating diversity. So diversity, geography, and a huge influence throughout 1,000 years from China and Europe.
That's fascinating. Because, I mean, for instance, this year I know that they're celebrating 150 years of interaction between Sweden and Japan. Mm-hmm. And one thinks of Japan as opening up in that last kind of period. But actually the cultural influences have been going on much longer.
Yeah. I'd like to talk about the historical side of it first, but later. But maybe can I talk about the perhaps the topography?
Yes, please.
Which plays a huge important role in Japan. The country consists of an archipelago of more than 6,500 islands here in Japan, and with an intricately convoluted, I think, coastline extending from north to south. And this makes the entire length of Japan 1.5 times longer than that of the United States. It's just under 19,000 miles.
Okay.
And enjoy a huge current of both cold and warm ocean currents that goes round and round and round in Japan, which is very unique as compared to any other countries, these ocean currents. And a mountain occupies some 70% of the land area, which is what we learn in kindergarten in Japan. And the rivers run through the country like capillaries, like any other blood capillaries, which brings nutrients to the sea, and meaning that Japan is blessed with wealth of marine resources. So the connection between the sun, the water, the mountain, the nutrients, and the connection between the sea, which creates a very unique style. That's the topography. And as you mentioned about the influence from outside Japan, on the cultural side, we've been influenced by the civilization of China for hundreds and hundreds of years. I think a simple seasonal basis of food, we've taken from the Chinese influence their divisions, their ideas of dividing the solar year into 24 and further dividing them into 72 seasonality, which are all expressed and represented in food in Japan. And in particular, the developments of Chinese culture influenced the banquet held by court nobles. There were 2 powers that came in, the court nobles and shogun powers. And the court nobles were influenced largely through the banquet system of Chinese. And this was held to express respect and loyalty in the samurai era. And this is the kind of a beginning of food design that was formed in Japan. That was in Muromachi period. And I also like to note that the sustainable culinary culture, it's not exactly sustainable now. We're extremely food independent, but in ancient times, we were extremely sustainable culinary culture. And this was originating from native local practices and refined over a period of time through Muromachi all the way through to Edo period, which is the beginning of the 17th century. And it's also coupled with vegetarian food practices of Zen sects of Buddhism that had somewhat ascetic aspects with so much restraints, which made such humbleness to the food. This whole idea of Buddhism gives us such a humbleness and restraints to what they eat. And it was also developed through the refinement of a tea ceremony, I think, and its associated cuisine. So I think that the combination between the tea ceremony, the refinement of the tea ceremony, and the refinement of Buddhism, vegetarian food, that had joined to become such a great culture.
There's a tremendous amount in there. I mean, I particularly love this association between topology and cuisine, which is something that I suspect people from many other countries don't think about in terms of their own food culture. But does it, I mean, what you're describing doesn't sound like the traditional, used in a different sense, view of Japanese food from outside, where perhaps there's a rather simplistic view of what Japanese food is. If you read your guidebook or whatever, it's quite segmented. And the depth that you describe, do you find that frustrating, that there's a difference between the outside perception and your perception of Japanese?
Are you talking about diversity?
I suppose I'm talking about the depth of associations you're drawing. There's diversity, but there's also the basis of it, if you like, that you've just been describing, and the connection with nature, etc., etc.
Well, it's a lot to do with the historical aspects of it that derived to the diversity of what we have, the diversity of Japanese food that we have now. As I said, there were two powers of a noble court and a shogunate, and of course noble court being the top of the hierarchy, but a shogunate people were always trying to copy the noble, and the food culture was also very close to it too as well. Do I feel uncomfortable with the diversity? Not so much, but from looking at it from the foreign aspects, you don't really see the hierarchy of culture. You only see Japanese food as flat cultural food, as in sushi, tempura, tonkatsu, kaiseki, ramen, soba, etc., etc., etc.
Exactly.
From the foreign perspective, you see Japanese culture as a flat food culture, whereas I'm not a man of science, I'm not a social study professor or anything, but we see it as a hierarchy of culture, and there's every different reasons, different background as to which each food derived from. And I think we think of kaiseki being the epitome of the culture. Not so much in a discriminating way, but...
yeah, but that's how you see it. So let's talk about influences. There has been this immense cross-cultural fertilization of Japanese food. In recent years, Japanese food has also, in turn, fertilized cuisine across the world. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Okay. Well, it's amazing Japanese cuisine has received such a global attention to begin with. But in my opinion, just a personal opinion, I think several phases through which Japanese food has had a huge influence on European food, particularly, not so much French, but it began from France, but particularly on Spain and Nordic cuisines, I think. Well, I mean, Nordic cuisines has its entirely different idea of food perspective, as you know. But firstly, I think from the 70s and 90s, about 20, 30 years, I think Japanese cuisine was mainly expressed abroad through processed items used for flavoring, such as miso and soy sauce. I think the soy sauce was first apparent in the French 3-star Michelin restaurant in 1974. People say that Louis XVIII or XV used to have soy sauce, but I don't believe that. You know. But they did used to export soy sauce through Dutch trade. But anyway, next phase included learning how to work with new ingredients, such as a raw fish. In addition, a minimalist idea, a sense of Japanese food philosophy came to the fore. The food design, for example, the design elements, number of items, a variety of colors, portion size, the use of sauces, the sense of rhythm in creating composition of a menu, as well as the appropriate use of containers to serve the food. And mastering these elements of Japanese cuisine led to an ability to produce such an influence as food. And also, on a rather less abstract note, a new method of emulsification, for example, using Japanese coagulants, such as kuzu, was developed. And in other words, we can say that after 20, 30 years, we've reached the end of the first stage of the impact of the Japanese cuisine, and now we're entering the second stage, which is the technology of taste in Japanese cuisine. You want to know what that is?
I do, yes, I do. We have 2 minutes. Tell me in one.
Okay. Well, we've got 2 minutes. All right. Well, we began from the hidden taste, as I said, appearance, the use of ingredients, and design of the food. And this is all for the lack of my words expression, rather superficial. It's just an outskirt of the way how Japanese food influenced European cuisine. But we're moving on to the technique of extracting umami through a use of dashi. But bringing out this taste of umami produced from kombu and katsuobushi, which is the kelp and dried bonito flakes, stock in recipes, however, in Western cuisines is very, very, very difficult. I tend to make a comparison with architectural plan when you do drawings of the architects of the planning.
Yes.
For example, even if the two buildings are built to resist earthquakes, for example, a skyscraper or a church constructed with stones piled on top of one another, or a wooden building such as Buddha's temple, for example, the designs and the ways in which the goals of these buildings is achieved is completely different. And so is the French, Spanish, Nordic cuisine, and the Japanese cuisine enjoy a completely different structure to create a certain taste. We're at an age they try to synergize both cuisines, but when it comes to a professional architectural planning, it's almost impossible. I mean, we do have umami, for example, amino acids in tomato, beef as well, but that's just an ingredient itself, but trying to incorporate that, which is a very difficult thing.
Okay. I'm afraid we have to close, but let me finish by asking, do you see that there will still be the separate entities in the future of, for instance, Japanese cuisine and French cuisine, or is there a kind of synergization going on and that basically things are going to meld and that the architectures are going to become so similar that there is no longer an independent style?
I think, culturally speaking, as a traditional man as I am, I don't think it's important to synergize, but it's more important to understand scientifically what each food, each Japanese food or any other cultural food can merit or benefit from it. And those scientific approach is more important than to trying to create a synergized recipe.
Okay.
Recipe is just a piece of paper that creates a dish.
Yes.
Whereas a scientific approach to understanding what food is, and what each cultural historical background has, anthropologically, socially, scientifically, is going to be more important. So I think the conclusion, my point, is that the chefs should have so much more responsibility and better knowledge and understanding scientifically what food is. And I think the chefs in the future, it really already has in Spain, Nordic countries, in North America. We're very behind with that in this country. But the chef needs to have a much, much more scientific understanding and social responsibilities as to the future of food.
That's a very interesting point.
And we can marry that from the history of Japanese food as well.
And to extend the scientific comparison, I mean, the disciplines need to remain intact, but there can still be lots of cross-fertilization at the edges.
I believe so too. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fascinating
Let's
conversation.
have lunch.
Thank you. So, I think Nobuko just has a quick announcement.
We have an announcement from the Secretariat before we take a lunch break. To the panelists and special guests, please follow our staff members who will guide you to your next lunch venue. We ask that our audience please remain in their seats for a few moments. ランチブレイクに入る前に事務局より
This is the same announcement in Japanese.
スペシャルゲストはスタッフがランチ会場へ誘導しますのでご移動をお願いいたします。その他の皆様は今しばらくお席にてお待ちください。
Thank you. You are a special guest. Let me guide you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
引き続きご来場者の皆様にお知らせがございます。13時45分からはメインホール301、302の3会場にて分科会が開始します。分科会は2部構成になっており、会場間の移動は自由です。引き続きノーベルプライズダイアログ東京2018をお楽しみください。この後ランチブレイクになりますが、3階303、304にて無料でサンドイッチを配布しますので、ぜひご利用ください。同会場には先ほども紹介のありました宇宙食の紹介ブースおよびサンプルがございます。またメイン会場の外ではパートナー企業の展示が行われておりますので、ぜひご覧ください。以上で午前中のセッションを終了いたします。お手元の同時通訳レシーバーは出口で回収させていただきます。午後のセッション開始時に再度会場入り口にて配布いたしますので、お持ち帰りにならないようご協力よろしくお願いいたします。Now an announcement for our audience here. The parallel discussion streams will begin at 1:45 p.m. in 3 venues, this main hall and rooms 301 and 302. Each discussion stream consists of 2 stages. Please feel free to move between streams. We hope you will enjoy the rest of the Nobel Prize Dialogue Tokyo 2018. Now we will be taking a lunch break. Free sandwiches are available in rooms 303 and 304 on the 3rd floor for everyone today. As you heard earlier, in these rooms there is a booth introducing space food and some samples. Please also visit the exhibitions provided by our partner companies outside the main hall. And with that, the morning session is concluded. Please return the simultaneous interpretation receivers at the exit. We will distribute them again for the afternoon sessions at the entrance to each venues. We ask for your cooperation to make sure that they are not taken back with you. Thank you very much and enjoy your lunch.